Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are in the world. My name is Ryan Gibson. I am a faculty member at the University of Guelph, and delighted to be facilitating our discussion around plain language summaries and really around the notion of how do we move knowledge between different user groups in formats that is useful and conducive to action at the end of the day. Our plan of attack is we'll do just a brief few moments of housekeeping. We'll then turn to Lucas Berek, who will give just a quick recap of some of his work he's been doing around what are these plain language summaries and some perspectives as a graduate student. And then I want to turn to some insights from the field, and we've invited both Bojan Fürst and Nicole Breedon to share their insights from the work that they've been doing in rural Northern Island communities across Canada as well as internationally. And then we'll have some time for some discussion at the very end. Before we get going, though, I want to recognize the traditional territory that I'm based at today in the city of Guelph in southern Ontario, and that the University of Guelph resides on the treaty lands of the Mississauga of the Credits. And we recognize this place as a gathering place where we work, learn, and as home to many past, present, and future First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The university acknowledges the land and this declaration of our collective responsibility to the place, the people, its history, its rights, and its perseverance. It's also important to recognize that everyone is joining in today from different locations across North America as well as internationally. And I'd encourage everyone to take a moment to reflect on the traditional territories where you live and work and to explore the opportunities for partnerships, collaboration, and ultimately transformation as we look at this journey around reconciliation. So, objectives for today: to do some enhancement of capacity on plain language summaries, learn from some past experiences, also to do some networking. That would be great at the conclusion of our 1 hour session. If you've not already done so, I'd encourage you to drop into the chat box your name, your location, as a way of starting that networking. As I said, we're joined by these three esteemed colleagues, experts in the field, that will share some of their information as well as their experiences. And just before we get going, I mentioned we are recording the session and we'll share it with folks that maybe weren't able to be here. If there's any sensitive information that you wouldn't share in public, I'd say don't share it in the webinar, as one would probably anticipate. You're welcome at any time to share questions if you've got them, or other comments through the chat feature at Zoom. We'll have an opportunity at the conclusion of the discussion for some dialogue. If you've not already added your stuff to the chat box, you're welcome to do so. And there's also a QR code on this screen at the moment. But if you've got your own personal favorite kind of plain language summary that you've come across, you might have created it yourself, or that you have discovered along the way, put it into the folder that's there. We'd love to kind of get a collection of some best practices that are out there. Or conversely, if you find one that was just absolutely not very well, wasn't conducive, you're free to share that as well. We'll put that QR code back up in a few moments. But at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Luke to share some of his perspectives related to plain language summaries, as well as reflections around grad students on this front.
Thank you, Ryan. Just give me a moment to share my screen. I have a couple slides. Thank you for coming to today's capacity building session on gaining new skills and plain language summaries. There we go. Thank you. A little chance for me to introduce myself. My name is Lucas Berek. I'm a second-year master's student in planning and development here at the University of Guelph. I'm involved in a couple of different extracurriculars like the Graduate Studies Society and the Ontario Agriculture College Graduate Student Council. I've been working with Ryan for 6 months now on things like knowledge mobilization and sustainable rural livelihoods. And I've come to enjoy the simple things in life as starting my academic career. And here is my little puppy, Ruby, who's turned out to be the love of my life. That was the picture of my dog I was mentioning. And then now we'll just get into what is a plain language summary. Plain language summaries are designed to share information with a non-expert audience. Simplifying and sharing your information into a plain language summary can offer audiences a chance to understand a variety of topics and ideas. Plain language summaries are structured to highlight key information and present clear and concise outlines of your work. It is important for plain language summaries. This is a great example. It's like a one-page document of a plain language summary. A lot of the research I've done, they vary in length between 100 words and 700 words. A lot of the time that they do not exceed over a page though, and they're written in in pretty clear, concise, and organized fashion. Plain language summaries are meant to supplement abstracts or synopses. It's a crucial part of the research stage and is something that can just expand your knowledge and your understanding of the topic. Um, some other examples of plain language summaries that don't necessarily come in like a one-page text could be a video abstract, but some issues with plain language summaries that come to actually be one of their benefits is with plain language summaries, how short they are. They're great for translation. You can share them across multiple different nations, multiple different languages, and the understandings of them can become to be agreed upon later on. But with challenges with video abstracts, they don't necessarily translate as well, and closed captions don't necessarily work as well. Literacy rates change, and all these different things. Plain language summaries, on a different note, are great for introducing topics and ideas. Plain language summaries get a chance in this world of competition and competing ideas, a way for you to quickly and effectively kind of promote your own work. Plain language summaries are also great for evaluating things from a non-technical or non-expert side. For a plain language summary, it gives you a chance to briefly read somebody's research and have an understanding of what they were trying to get about. And for a great part about it too is when it comes to concluding ideas within plain language summaries, it ends up being a great way to highlight results, significance, and other key findings in your research. Um, I had an extra slide here just discussing a few points. Somehow it didn't make it into the bracket there, but it was just discussing how plain language summaries are meant for a non-technical or non-expert audience. They are supposed to be for being inclusive and avoid what people call academic bubbles. Academic bubbles within the faculty or field of things can get pretty like tight knit, and communicating outside of those bubbles are important. Plain language summaries are also a chance for people to have a wider chance for an engaging audience. When it comes to looking at plain language summaries, it gives you way more of an opportunity for your research to be put in front of people who had never seen it before. Academic journals or academic articles are very intimidating to read when you're not part of the field. And when it comes to introducing new topics, a short, brief plain language summary, almost like an infographic, is inviting. It is something that people want to participate in. And why plain language summaries are important. Plain language summaries are important. They're inclusive and they're to a wider audience. They're quick and efficient at sharing ideas and topics. And those ideas and topics are understandable and effective. From just getting into a student's perspective and letting the other experts speak on behalf of plain language summaries, from a student's perspective, it's great because a lot of students are looking at for the best bang for their buck when it comes to time and effort. I think it's a lot of like this in the professional field too, but plain language summaries introduce topics and begin the research dialogue that doesn't necessarily happen elsewhere when it comes to just trying to explain a full academic article. The communication aspects of it allows for you to potentially read a plain language summary and to take the knowledge that you learned and talk to a peer, exchange ideas, and potentially work on something that could be much larger. The direction for plain language students using summaries is important. This is my when I've gone for my research recently was plain language summaries are being an increasingly important part of the process. And within the direction of research, it is important for us as young students to be able to learn how to apply the research into practice. Plain language summaries are a great introduction for students to be able to communicate their work. This is similar to my idea of what like a 3-minute thesis competition could be like. It's important for a young academic to be able to, at one point, clearly and concisely explain what they're working on to anybody. And that was something that I thought was crucial from my background. Most importantly, I'd like to say, though, plain language summaries are a way for people to just exchange. And that was the main part I got from all the research, and I was just happy to be a part of it as a student perspective. And then I had a slide on resources, but I'm going to share some of those resources while we're doing the conversation. I'd like to thank everyone for listening.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Luke. An interesting perspective, and always lovely to see your puppy as well. On that front, nice kind of human touch to it. Now, I'm going to turn next to Nicole and Boyan, and I think it's in that order, but I will look to see if anyone has a panicked face. They do not panic, so maybe I'll turn the floor over to Nicole to share her experiences from a variety of different perspectives on that front. But I'll maybe let you introduce yourself, Nicole, and then you can dive right in.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for those lovely introductions, Ryan and Luke, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Breedon. I currently work as the Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator at the Rural Development Institute here at Brandon University in Manitoba. So for today, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about myself. Well, here, maybe I'll just start this now. But I'll start by sharing a little bit about myself and the work that I do, followed by my perspectives of knowledge translation within the world of knowledge mobilization and that type of perspective, and then conclude with some summary writing with an example of my own work here. Okay, so a little bit about myself. My educational background is within the field of biological anthropology. I conducted my undergraduate education at the University of Manitoba as well as Trent University in Ontario, and I just completed my master's from the University of New Brunswick back in 2022. So I've been working at RDI since 2019, and I've taken on a few different roles. As I previously mentioned, I do work within the world of knowledge mobilization, but I also work within the field of international relations, as well as some research on the side as well. Alongside RDI, I do spend my summers as a field technician at the University of New Brunswick Bioarchaeological Field School. So that's what those photos along the bottom are. And serendipitously, I was able to conduct some tourism research at the site last year in 2023 to explore the role of tourism in rural and remote areas. So as you can see, these fields are definitely not similar. They are definitely two very niche kind of topics. But I think that's the beauty of rural and remote community work, or any actionable-based work really, is that communities are complex, and when you're dealing with applied research, it's inherently going to be intersectional. Not only because us as individuals have our own perspectives based on our positionality, but because the work that you're doing is going to be shared with multiple people in multiple different realms. And I think that it's a really interesting way to think beyond the research that you're embedded in to make it actionable. It all depends on the work that you're doing. So for the work that I'm currently working on, there are three primary folks that we're hoping to share this knowledge with. First would be the archaeological team, the excavation team, the folks who work within the world of tourism or tourism practitioners within the field, and then the public. So I'll do a little bit of an overview of what that research kind of looks like. I'm currently interested in exploring the intersection of archaeology as a point of interest within heritage tourism. So yes, I conducted these surveys, and the hope is that we'll be able to build on our understanding of how the excavation team is engaging with the public, as well as be able to showcase to other communities how they might best be able to share their community assets or the heritage within their communities to engage within the tourism sector if they want to. So when creating deliverables, it's important to make a few specific considerations to understand who the audience is so that you're sharing your information effectively. These considerations can help guide the conversation both in structure, in content, and in style, as was previously discussed by Luke. So the questions you'll want to start addressing before you begin your summary writing, or as you begin your summary writing, are on the slide here. So first, what do the people you're speaking with want to know? Making sure that you're honing down your research interests to the folks that you're going to be sharing this information with. Because you can't share every detail of the project to someone, you would definitely be there all night. It's important to understand what they need to know or what information might benefit them given their positionality within your research or within the community specifically. Second is the vernacular. So what terminology is going to make sense for the audience in which you're sharing? Like had been previously discussed, The more plain the language can be, the larger the audience you'll be able to attract. So even though you can use certain terminology with certain folks that you're sharing based on their prior knowledge and your prior knowledge, the more simple the vernacular can be, the less jargon that can be included, the better, just because it's going to be made accessible for more folks across the different stakeholder positions or positionalities. And finally, how is this information being made accessible? I've tried to whittle this down a little bit, but the two main considerations that I keep coming back to are determining which audio aids folks might need, or which languages might make the most sense, given the information you're sharing and who you're sharing it with. I feel like, especially within the Western world, it's very much publishing in English, but I think that it's an important consideration to make to ensure that your research goes beyond the folks in which you're typically engaging with. So definitely understanding what supports might be necessary to make sure that the information is accessible. And then second, being able to share your work with these folks and literally how you are sharing this information. So if you are hoping to share it with other academics, a conference is most likely going to be the most ideal way to share your information or things like that. But if you're thinking about sharing your information specifically with community, you're going to take a different approach, making those community visits, making sure that the location is accessible and that type of thing. So making sure that you know where your audience is going to be, where the best place to share that information is going to be, is an important consideration. So once you understand who the audience is and what information they'll be interested in, you can begin to look at the effective ways of creating your summary writing, or consolidating your thoughts and your notes and your research into the summary. So when you're first consolidating this information, you can break the summary down into general categories. So first and foremost, you want to introduce the topic and its significance within the field. This should be a very clear, overarching depiction to catch the attention of your readers and introduce the topic from your viewpoint. The shorter it is, the easier it's going to be to capture their attention. Next, you can focus on the background and outline some of the context in relation to the theme in which you're proposing. This can be additional or more information, more specific information you hope to explore. But this is when you can really drive home the purpose of your research, the purpose of the project, whatever the case may be, why it might be impactful, and how you have or how you're planning to engage in the project itself. Really giving the bare bones of the work that you're going to be conducting. And third, and finally, you're going to want to drive home the importance of the project on what you're doing with either the key findings or key impacts. So if you do have findings to share, making sure that they are very quickly and readily accessible at the conclusion of your summary, with relation to your audience, what they want to know, the themes in which you're going to be sharing on or focusing on with regard to your research. But if you don't have any findings yet, you can always work to identify how you're going to be moving forward with the research. So that final piece of the summary is really the impacts that's going to come from your work, whether or not the findings are already there or not. So once you've kind of categorized the information that you are ready to share, you can break it down a little bit further into your actual summary writing. So in the orange is kind of the introductory sentence that I provided earlier. In the blue is the methods that outline the background of the research, and the green, the importance of the work or how it might be used. So this was a very brief summary. I realized I kind of split it up a little bit in the introduction, which wasn't the plan, but this is kind of a breakdown of just the overview of the project in which I shared earlier. If you're having trouble getting into the summary writing itself, I do have a few tips and tricks that I often implement when I'm creating any deliverable for any project. They might seem obvious, but they do actually help to organize thoughts. So first and foremost, review the call for summaries, or review if you're going to be putting a summary in for a specific project, review the call for summaries. If you're just creating it yourself, really make sure that you understand who the audience is and what information you want to be highlighting based on where you're sharing this information. This will help hone your research down to the key points that are going to be important and relevant for your work moving forward. Second, speak out loud when you're drafting your discussion points. There have definitely been moments where I've had trouble getting started, so I've just recorded myself, explained the project, listened back. I feel like this method can really help you catch where you might be getting tripped up or where things might not be fitting properly or sounding how you want them to sound. So it's really helpful to try and get that information out naturally and organically, and then writing your summary based off of that information that you've provided. Third, including key points but leaving room for discussion. You can't go through the entire project in a summary, unfortunately. If you can, congratulations, but I don't know that it's entirely possible all the time. So being able to provide the really key overarching pieces is going to be important to make sure that the information and the scope of your project is out there and accessible. And so long as your information is available, you can still make contact with folks who are interested in that topic. Next, very simple, but share your work. Before presenting, before publishing, before any type of sharing of summaries, it's really helpful to engage with folks in your inner circle to determine whether or not you're capturing all of the fundamental information that you need while being removed from jargon and the technical terms. I've definitely had a lot of phone calls with family and friends to just hear me out for 10 minutes and then let me know if I've missed anything. I think as researchers, we become so embedded in the topic in which we're exploring that it's really easy to brush by information that we already have prior knowledge on, or leave out key pieces just because we know what that information is. So being able to share this with someone, ideally someone within the demographic you're hoping to share with, and outside of the demographic you're hoping to share with, because that way you're going to get a more holistic representation, or I guess feedback, based on your writing, the material that you've provided. Next, obviously, address their questions if they want to have their questions addressed, and listen to their feedback after sharing your content. And finally, going back to the summary, or the call for summaries. So the information can sometimes, I feel, get away from us when we're trying to write summaries just because there's so much information we can include. You're trying to put all of your research on a single page, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. So reflecting back to, again, whether it be a call for summaries or whether it just be a review of the audience, going back and making sure that that information is aligned with the purpose of your publication or your deliverable that you're creating. Yeah. And so I realized that was very fast, but if anyone has any questions or comments, I would be happy to address them now. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole, for those really great suggestions and tips. I was thinking of myself talking out loud, and now I've got validation for doing that, talking out loud to myself. If people have got questions, as a reminder, you're welcome to put them in the chat box. We will have an opportunity in about 10-12 minutes to have an open discussion, but perhaps at the moment, seeing I don't see anything in the chat box at the moment, I can turn the floor over to Bojan Fürst, and I'll let Bojan do an introduction to himself, as well as to jump right in.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Bojan Fürst. I'm Manager of Knowledge Mobilization at the Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development at Memorial University of Newfoundland. Thank you for having me. This is really something I love talking about, so really grateful for the invitation. I'm going to start. I really liked everything that Luke and Nicole had to say, so I'll be quick. because they stole half of my thunder. I am not a big fan of plain language. And the reason why I'm not a big fan of plain language is because I don't think that's our problem. I think our main problem is that as researchers, we most of the time do not understand our audiences. Or we don't, we actually, when we think about it, we do understand our audiences, but we very rarely think about our audiences in those terms. Maybe, Ryan, if you could go to the next slide. Oops. It's giving you trouble. So, and you can go right on the third one, maybe. So, as Nicole pointed out, different audiences will expect different things from you. And if you put yourself as a researcher into, if you think about what you do, right? So you're interested in a particular question, you will develop some sort of methodology, you'll read a ton of literature that already exists on the subject, you will develop a theoretical framework that you want to situate yourself within. You will do some field work, and then you will write this great paper or a dissertation or a thesis, right? Great, wonderful. Now you actually need to talk to somebody about it. And probably the first people that you are going to talk to are going to be your peers. And you're probably going to present at a conference. That abstract, that's probably the first research summary that you are going to write. But that's an abstract to an academic conference. So you're going to be presenting to your peers who have probably read a good chunk of the articles that you read, come from similar backgrounds, probably have conducted similar kinds of research, right? So what they're interested in? They're probably going to be interested in your theoretical framework. They're probably going to be interested in your methodology. They're probably less likely going to be interested in your actual results, because your results are very likely to be very particular to a place or to a group of people or whatever you were doing. So let's say you are presenting, you did your research in rural Newfoundland and you're presenting at an international conference in, I don't know, Brussels. They don't care about the particularities of rural Newfoundland. What they're interested in is how things you learned can be translated to other environments, right? So they want that theory, they want that methodology, they want to know what is the universal stuff that you have discovered doing your particular fieldwork. And that's great. That's relatively easy to do because you've been immersed in that kind of work for 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, however long it took you. But now imagine yourself in a completely different situation. Let's say you went to a, I don't know, brewery opening in your little town, and you're having a great time, and somebody approaches you, and turns out she's a local journalist, and you start chatting, and she asks you what you do, and you say you're a researcher, and she asks you what's your research about. So what are you going to say? This is also a research summary. We often don't think about it, but research summary is not necessarily 250-word abstract or 2-page official summary, right? It can be the way you talk about your research to a different audience. So that journalist is probably interested in, how did you get interested in the topic that you're researching? What did you find out? How is that going to affect people in your community or community that you've been researching, right? So it's a very different conversation from the one you had with your peers. And then at some point, you're very likely to want to present to the community you did research in. What do they want to hear? They probably don't care about your theoretical framework. They probably don't care about your methodology all that much unless you really screwed it up and they're mad at you. Then they're going to talk to you about how you went about things. But what they do want is they probably want to hear you reflect back things they shared. They probably want to understand how that is going to impact them and what they can do about the issue that you are researching. And very often they're going to be interested in, how does that compare? How does the issue that they're dealing with that you have studied compare to a similar issue somewhere else? And how did those people deal with it? Because they're looking for solutions, right? So that's why I think that the language is not necessarily the problem. because while, yes, with a master's or a PhD, you are an expert on a topic, if you come to a community, they're an expert on their own lives, much more than you're ever going to be. So being able to reflect what they told you back to them is actually validating their expertise, but also providing them with new information. One little tip I have from over the years that I've been doing this, if there are simple things that you can offer communities as an option, that something that they could do with the resources that they have available, always provide that option. This is not you telling them this is what you should do, but this is you saying, from my research, these are kinds of things that you might consider doing that might work. So it has to be their decision. It's not you telling them what to do, it's giving them options. So how do you go about putting together a research summary? There are a whole bunch of templates. I'm going to share a couple of them. This one was developed by Research Impact Canada. This is a network of over 20 universities across Canada and UK. And they have developed this very particular format for the research summaries. This is an example from York University. They call them research snapshots, and they ask very basic questions. The box that jumps out at you is what you need to know. And then it tells you what the research is about, what the researchers do, what did the researchers find, what are the researchers proposing, and how you can use this research. And then it has some extra information. I'm going to paste links to all of this stuff. The next one that I also find very helpful for different reasons is the one that was developed by Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto. That's the next one, Ryan. Next one. Oops. And one more. There you go. So they developed this plain language writing checklist. Now, keep in mind as you read this, that is very much situated within the health sector, right? So the information they're trying to pass on is a little different than, let's say, if you're working in rural development or tourism or whatever. They focused a little bit more on language, but they have developed these two boxes. The first one is called SMIT, single most important thing. And the second one is BLAM, bottom line actionable message. That works really well in certain situations. I like this template because it also offers, as you move through it, it's like 6 pages long or something. It also, the checklist, it also offers you some design pointers. It offers you some knowledge translation principles that are mostly sound, especially if you are in health sector. So this is something that you can kind of have at the side of your desk to think about. The one little, Nicole, I really like the little tips that you provided, because most people, I do a fair bit of radio documentaries. So if you're writing a script for radio documentary, you are constantly speaking it out because it has to sound good, right? You can't just write it. So that's a great tip. One little exercise we do here when we run these plain language or summary workshops, and this is not, you are not crafting a summary, this is a writing exercise. We ask students and faculty to write a clickbait story and headline out of the research. It sounds silly, but it really forces, and you all know what a clickbait story or research is, right? You won't believe these 5 things about X. It really forces you to kind of pick 2 or 3 or 5 points that you want to get across, because Nicole is absolutely right. You can't possibly get everything across in a page. For example, my favorite example of all time is a criminology student a PhD student from Memorial University, whose clickbait headline was, "Want to get away with murder? Here is 5 things your alibi needs." And that's what he studies. He studies alibis. So That's a great little exercise that you can do on the side of your desk before you start writing the official summary, because it will help you focus on those few things. No template will do you any good unless you are aware of the audience and what information that audience wants, needs, and how you can best deliver it. So to wrap it up, I don't think you need to speak in plain language necessarily. Sometimes you have to use a complicated word. Just explain it. I mean, that's totally fine. The problem is not the complexity of the language. The problem is tailoring that language and the information you're sharing to the audience that's in front of you. So that's not an audience problem that you have to cater to. That is your problem as a researcher to adapt to. That doesn't mean that you blindly cater to your audience and their whims, but it does mean that you have to be intentional how you speak about your research and aware who you are speaking to and what is the actual information you feel you need to transmit. So I'll stop here and we can have a chat.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that, Boyan, and to Nicole and to Luke for their insights, experiences, trials and tribulations in terms of how do we make research accessible, how do we make it actionable for everyone that is intended to use it. At this point, if people have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, put it in a chat box. We've got Boyan and Nicole and Luke. They're available for questions if you've got any. I see there might be one in the chat box. Nope, that's Boyan posting some resources. So I'm going to take my role as facilitator and ask the first question, while maybe others are thinking about their own, and this is maybe for all three of you. What's the biggest mistake people make, from your experience, in doing plain language summaries, whether it is doing the translating, the transferability, or what's the biggest mistake that you see people often make about how to make their research actionable? Or a mistake. It doesn't need to be the biggest, but something you maybe see frequently that you go, that again. Luke, go ahead. I think you've got one or
I just wanted to quickly point out, I had on a slide there that I skipped that mentioned that there's no such thing as a plain language summary that is perfect, and that is something that it's like a working process. So that was like one point that I wanted to try to get out was when I was doing through this whole process, it was coming to target, like when we discussed target audience and all these things, the idea of the perfect plain language summary not existing though, or may not existing, is something that like brought me as like a young academic a little bit of peace. It's like a working document.
Well, maybe I can offer an example I see all the time. You walk into a, community hall or at a municipal leaders gathering, and you have a researcher who has a really important piece of research that they need to share. And they start with this long explanation of theoretical framework they use. They tell you exactly how many people they interviewed, exactly what the demographic breakout of those interviews was. And they spend about 20 minutes out of the 25 walking you through the research process. And you can see the audience just tuning out, right? Because what they really wanted to know is, what did you find? How is that going to affect us? What can we do about it? Right?
Yeah, I was actually going to say the exact same thing. I feel like, and this is just, again, my perspective within the field of anthropology, but I feel like a lot of the times when we're writing thesis or dissertation work, we are very focused on exactly how we did it, how the project was implemented and that sort of thing. And then at the end, there really isn't much room for moving forward. So I think that forward thinking and kind of leaving that to the wayside because you're trying to get your work out there in an academic setting or in an academic setting, you want to get it out in the right way, so to say. I think that really is like a big problem, a big piece of it, because as Bojan had mentioned, sometimes you lose the audience when you don't really drive home the deliverables, the actionable pieces. that sort of thing.
Maybe Ryan, I can share one anecdote, and I'm sorry if you find yourself in the spot. Some years back, I ran a podcast about rural issues, and we organized a workshop for about half a dozen graduate students and recent PhDs on storytelling. So the first day of that workshop was great. We had a couple of CBC producers working with me, and everybody was telling these great personal stories. We were all in stitches and tears. It was awesome. Next day, we said, okay, so everything we learned yesterday about storytelling, let's apply to your research. And it's like we walked into a room of completely different people. Everybody was uptight. It was all boring. It was terrible. And so three of us who were leading the workshop, we sat down and said, what is going on? Where are those people from yesterday? And then we realized what's happening. People were defending the research. So unless you are talking to and that's absolutely normal because we are trained as academics to defend our research in front of our peers, right? That's how science progresses. That's a good thing, except the rest of the world, it doesn't work that way, fortunately or unfortunately. So when you are asked to speak to your research outside of your peer group, you are already an expert. Nobody's asking you to defend your research. They came to you because you're an expert. So it's okay to be excited. It's okay to share anecdotes. It's okay to focus on the results of your research and what that may mean in the future. And you don't have to stress out about defending your research to all audiences. That especially goes when you're talking to media. If they find out that you completely messed up and made up the results of your research, they'll come back to you and the questions are going to be very different. And yes, you will be defending yourself. But otherwise, they don't want you to defend your research. They just want you to tell them a good story.
Perfect. Other questions? I'm going to look around the proverbial table at the moment. I see that we've got one in the chat box. I'll maybe read it out on that front. Actually, Daniela, did you want to read it out yourself? If you've got an ability to do so, you're welcome to unmute and to read out your question.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. Thank you to all the presenters. Very informative. My question is, how can you ensure the right balance of details and not putting too much or too little information in a plain language summary? Is there a surefire template that should be followed? Or should more focus be given to just the findings and the conclusive part of the research? Thank you.
I can take a crack quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you focus on your audience, part of that problem will solve itself. Because if you ask yourself, what do they need to know? So that immediately focuses you on like 2 or 3 things you need to communicate, right? So if you're talking to your academic peers, well, they need to know how I got here. They need to know that my research is sound and that my methodology was sound, and they need to know a little less about the actual findings, right? But if you're talking to a community, well, they want to know these 3 things, and then you can not include the details and the other stuff and just focus on the thing that you think your audience would like to know. And don't assume what your audience wants to know outside of academic audience. Ask them. If you know you're doing a presentation to a community, hey, I did all this research. It's 280-page thesis. Clearly, you don't want me to present all of this. What would you like to know? Right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know that there's an exact formula per se. The way that I typically, and this is just for me personally, but the way that I typically try to break it down is intro sentence, 1 or 2 sentence on the methods, maximum a sentence or 2 on background, and then really spend time on the findings or the actual pieces. I think, leaving that room to explain your work further is really valuable. It can lead to those conversations following up on your publications, or whatever the case may be, your presentations, however you're sharing that information, because those who are interested will reach out. They will, they will contact you, they will discuss further, or they'll go to the main source of your research. So I think it's more so making sure that you represent the purpose of your project, the purpose of your work, the actionable pieces that come from it, and then those who want to know more, you'll hear from them. Like they'll make sure to connect with you.
Thank you for your response.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks for that. And I see there's been a comment by Brendan in the chat box there around a problem related to graphs and charts and perhaps being used incorrectly, particularly pie charts. And I see Bojan has added his personal favorite when pie charts that don't add up to 100% are used in plain language summaries or to convey information. But wondered if anybody else wanted to make a comment about the use of visual images, pie charts, bar charts, whatever it might be, in these sorts of kind of accessible documents that translate knowledge. Go for it, Luke.
Yeah, that's one thing when I was getting a grasp of the research behind all of this, I was looking into not just only like plain language summaries, but alternative forms of media, whether it be infographics or video abstracts. And I realized that when it comes to communicating things and within my perspective of an academia or professional work, I always viewed it was more transitionable to be using language than it would be to be representing things in image or through symbolism, other things, keeping things clear and concise without levels of interpretation or without significant levels of interpretation made it more effective for myself, at least.
I think to build on that a little bit, it really depends on who's presenting and what they're sharing. Like, I think there's definitely room for those infographics and those visuals, but I really do believe that the world of statistics, the world of like visual aids, I don't think it's fully understood by everyone within academia. So you use these visual aids, and I do it too. I definitely do. I do the pie charts. I'm a pie chart person, but I also understand that there's a lot of statistics and the importance of what those visuals represent that may be either, not fully exploring the project in and of itself. Like, they might be helpful to convey some of your work and definitely spice up a presentation, but if it's not alluding to the actual results that you're getting, then that has to be considered.
And Ryan, I don't know how much time you have, because don't get me started about visual representations, but the one point to take into account, if you're going to try to present your research in a form that is other than a written form, be aware that we have that your presentation of your research will be judged not just on the content of your research, but on the form. Everybody knows, or they think they know, what a documentary film is supposed to look like. Everybody knows what a podcast is supposed to sound like. So suddenly, if you are not living up to whatever standard your audience is expecting, that is going to enter into the judgment on the results of your research that may or may not have anything to do with it. So be careful. You have to be very comfortable using visual media, design in order to communicate effectively and not actually hurt the message that you're transmitting.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm just
hire professionals.
Indeed. I'm just looking at the clock and noticing we have about 5 minutes left, and I thought this might be a really nice opportunity. If people still have questions, you're welcome to add them in the chat box, but I thought I would just share one last piece of information, which is a bit more about kind of next steps. And after today's webinar, we will post the recording online, and you'll get an email. You'll also get an email. In that email, you'll also be asked to provide a brief reflection on the session that we've had today and the discussion. I think it is a whopping 5 questions. It might take you a whopping 2 minutes to complete, but we'd really appreciate any feedback you have. If you've not already done so, we encourage you to share your own favorite kind of plain language summary. You can upload it through the QR code that's listed here on the screen. Bojan and Nicole have shared some examples from their past work. And third, this workshop is a precursor to an upcoming event taking place next week, an open invitation that if anyone would like to join, you're welcome to do so for the 2024 North Atlantic Forum that'll be taking place in Letterfrack, Ireland. You can find details at the website listed there. And really exciting is that this particular initiative, this webinar, and coming out of the Letterfrack conference, we will be generating a series of probably 4 to 6 plain language summaries that are going to be capturing some of the information that's shared at the conference and bringing it back to communities that may not have otherwise been able to participate in the conference. So do stay tuned. You'll be receiving that information probably over the summer. But at this stage, I want to thank our presenters, to Luke, to Nicole, to Bojan. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your calendar to join us and to share with us your knowledge, and to also recognize that this initiative has been funded through the Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance, which is a collaboration between the University of Guelph and the Government of Ontario. And at any time, where you'll find the information on the plain language summaries emerging from the North Atlantic Forum is on this QR code that you can see here on the screen. This will also be where we post the webinar recording, and as well as any other resources that people have identified. So with that, I'm going to just double check to see if there's anything else in the chat box for questions. I see none. So with that, maybe I'm going to suggest we wrap up. Please join me in thanking Luke, Bojan, and Nicole for their contributions. We look forward to hearing from everybody, and I'll let everyone continue on with the rest of their day.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Having